Welcome to Dweller of the Dark. We are a channel honoring the yellowed and blackened bones of many prominent authors. We will be digging up several obscure, strange, and forgotten authors who influenced many of the great horror, science fiction, and fantasy writers today. More tales of the horrifying, obscure, strange, and forgotten are climbing out of the tombs. Subscribe, comment, like, donate, or I'll send Thaddeus Forge to steal your heathen soul. Unknown horror masters, send us ghoulish delights for the Skull and Bones collection. Your pound of writer's flesh will continue to feed our ghouls for now. Books, websites, podcasts, in the links below. Children of Horror, Legion of Ghouls. Tonight, it's a full moon, and there's something prowling in the Arizona darkness as we unleash Thomas Swafford's Skinwalker. Enjoy. Skinwalker. In the modern West, ancient evil can still exist. By Thomas Swafford. Written March 23rd, 2022. 1. A bad man. I'm drinking a steaming cup of coffee, looking out over my brew to a frosted western Arizona sunrise. My eyes don't see as well as they used to, but today is an exception, and I catch the drifts of white snow on the golden and red rocks of the withered landscape. I feel the bite of the morning cold on my aged hands as they numb and sting to the wintry breeze. As I hear the whistle of wind on the snow-covered cactus, I'm thinking a lot these days about my place in this world. Man, how the times have changed, and I can't help but shudder at the way people have changed. Seems everyone is a little crueler and more selfish these days. It's like I'm seeing them as a lumbering horde of fools, not realizing war is at their doors. They're wandering in zombie-like circles, delusional in the midst of a battle. It's as though they're dancing with death while remaining deaf, dumb, and blind to the inherent danger. Dale, you have that look again. A pretty voice chimes from a busy kitchen cooking eggs. Grace always knows when I'm getting the bad feeling again. It's that obvious, huh? I do my best to smile broadly toward her. Then I turn back to the desert and take a sip of my bitter chicory. Grace walks up behind me and gives me the warmest of hugs. When your baby blues drift out toward that particular stretch of Badlands, it's quite obvious to read. Yes, it's back. Whether he's coming back is hard to say. Maybe they will send a new one. I look toward her as she releases her hug. I watch her eyes widen with fear as she leans away from me and puts her right hand to her open mouth concerned, stuttering, practically stammering on her words. Can't someone else take over this time? When she sees me shake my head no, she protests angrily and storms off, upset. Why, for the love of God, does it always have to be you, and you alone battling these things? That battle I mentioned, I know you want to ask about that, naturally or not. It's that all-time classic fight of good versus evil. You know the one. It's the conflict the preacher is always ranting his warnings about to save your soul. For me, despite the fire and brimstone warnings of that shaman of the good Lord, Preacher Warren, finger wagging and scolding to our community. Evil remains ever constant. It remains ever enduring in the cheating wife who just got bludgeoned to death by her husband. It's the uncanny and unforgettable smell lingering from the rotten corpse hanging up in a nearby tree. Maybe a suicide, or maybe not. And for me personally, it's the occasional chill running down my spine on late nights when I walk like a ghost around our quiet town with grace. Especially when we pass the shadow of the long-closed first bank. To me, in those moments, as the bank's figure looms in the moonlight, it's a shattered, shot-up corpse of its former self. Yes, after 50 years of law enforcement, I know how hideous, cruel, and evil people can be. Whether the devil made them do it, who knows? How many times did I face true evil in my career? It's hard to really say, and I have certainly lost count. And to be honest, I often do my damnedest to try and forget. I've heard you can only stare in the darkness for so long before it stains you. Or, as in my case, it locks its claws into you never to let go. I definitely believe the latter. My name is Dale Hughes. I am a retired sheriff, but for years I served our ever-burgeoning town of Winslow, Arizona. We had a lot of different people in that Arizona town. There were many nice, law-abiding people, and some not so much. What types of people do you say? Well, the majority were whites, Mexicans, and Native Americans. However, in my area, Native Americans, the Denny people, were the most prominent to the region. Who are the Denny, you ask? Let me clear that up a bit. To you, they are better known as the Navajo. It's impossible for anyone that is not a Navajo to know everything about their culture. The Navajo keep their secrets hidden well. Hell, I've lived around them more than half my life, and I still only know a fraction of their language and writing. And that goes even less about their culture and beliefs. And for my Navajo friends who might be reading this, you know as well as I do that just because you are a Navajo doesn't mean you know everything either. The really dark stuff stays hidden with their shaman, medicine man, and possibly the chief. With that kind of language blockade and their secret nature in mind, you can imagine the uphill battles I had following up on murders, robberies, and missing persons. It didn't matter, and still doesn't matter, that I was the sheriff. As they gave my badge the dismissive stare, I always realized something profound. What was law enforcement to the powers held by a Navajo medicine man? I can't tell you how many times I blew up or walked off the reservation frustrated by their antics. And that's with the respect of the village elders, the chief, and my preschool working knowledge of the Navajo language. Even now, as I've grown, I can see the reason the Army used the Navajo language against the Japanese in World War II. Their intricate and complex language that gave me many long nights of headaches on the job trying to figure it out was the perfect secret code weapon. A weapon, I might add, that the Japanese to this day never figured out. No matter how great a people are, and the Navajo truly have many great ones, there's always a bad egg. One who sneers instead of smiles. The person who uses a gun or knife instead of a handshake. The guy or girl who'd rather set the Arizona desert ablaze in an inferno rather than watch the breezes drift across the wildflowers. Yes, Every group of people from Arizona to across the globe have their bad eggs. In my town, that rotten to the core egg was Joe Two-Horse. How his own Navajo community shunned his acts of violence and terror on their own people. When he wasn't beaten on a young girl who turned down his sexual advances, he'd be robbing the local grandmother in her teepee of her Social Security. And this was all before he had turned 15. The monster of a man to evolve would do far worse. When Joe Two-Horse was climbing up the final ranks of deviltry and infamy, I was 45. It wouldn't be long before our paths would cross, for better or worse. But I had heard the family name long before this serpent raised his head to strike out. Two Horses seemed to garner a reputation for ill repute. Their despicable acts were kind of a family tradition. The first time I heard of the bad deeds of a Two-Horse, Tommy Two-Horse, and their heinous atrocity of burning down the local school, stunned everyone. Tommy hadn't just burnt the school, you see. He killed the beloved Anne-Marie and the school's only teacher. Plus, 2 precious children had burned in the inferno. I was 17 and had just moved to town with my family when that event had happened. Why Tommy did it, he would never say. But the next Two-Horse would be far worse. Joe Two-Horse, with his constant leering smile and lecherous grin that would make the devil himself shudder, was one of those people that made my stomach flip nervously and my hands clench in a rage. I always had a bad feeling about Joe from the first time I saw him. He was the bully you stayed clear of. Joe was the guy when you saw him strutting and waving his raven hair, you knew trouble was afoot. While he was a few years older than me and a high school dropout long before I had arrived, he still hung around the school to slap around the pukes, as he would say. Some would say Joe wasn't all bad back then. Certainly, he had his fair share of the ladies that would have, back then, disagreed that he was pure evil. His lecherous smile was a beacon of warmth to them. His chiseled physique and bad boy persona would hypnotically lure and entice them to swim in his treacherous waters. It was even said while he worked on a job site, he'd hear the girls' accolades, whether carrying boards or jackhammering concrete on a construction project. Everyone would hear the Elvis-like squeal and hoot calls from the ladies passing by. Nobody kept tabs on him when he left town. In fact, I myself would be relieved. You could feel our desert Arizona town cool when he was away as well. The simmer of his hate was ever at a boil whenever he was back ready to burn everyone and everything in his path. But what was Joe Two-Horse like away from us? His co-workers and friends would say, "He's a beast on the job site, Dale. That dude works for months and months without a complaint. But then the idiot has to burn through all his cash in a week, like it's his last hurrah." I stopped for a moment, looking at my aged, thinning skin. In the moment, as I rubbed my weathered temples, I recall a horrific thought. Skin is so vital to us. It's the barrier to protect us from disease, and the first thing we notice on a person. It's the substance we feel when we scratch ourselves on a bramble bush or the burn from a desert sun. But for a skinwalker, it's something more. It's their disguise, their cloak, and their method to trick us into believing they are human. We take them into our confidence, into our hearts, and into our homes, where, once in the safety and concealment of our dwellings, they rip us to bloody tattered shreds. Was Joe, or his kin, one of these supernatural beasts? I'd be hard-pressed to say for sure. His skin covered that handsome long-toothed smile. It disguised the arrogance and ugliest parts of his heart and mind. But his outward appearance could charm the panties off a nun. And if I had a daughter, or was a woman, I'd have warned all to stay clear of this rogue. Under his skin was that selfish, cruel creature I might have warned you about. A creature so enamored in himself and forsaking all others after their use was no longer a need. Yet, there are always those women and men to whom that type appeals. Maybe he was working his dark energies even then with those phosphorescent green eyes to hypnotize or elicit control. Maybe it was his eyes of jade that swayed to lull a person to sleep. As I remember his eyes, I still get chills thinking of the growing void of those emerald stares. I recall my old bones shaking from the deadness of them and the way they glinted, a polished green sea stone. Councilman Rob Barker, waddling up, has howled at me often at the office to arrest Joe.
When are you going to arrest that scumbag, Sheriff?
I'd feign ignorance and say, which scumbag would that be in our sprawling Winslow, sir? We only have a few thousand to choose from, including yourself. The councilman was used to my jest as he walked up. Of course, he'd bother me about Joe during my siesta as I took in the Arizona sun. Toward my leisurely perch, he'd plead in a whine.
I know I sound like a broken record coming in here, Dale, but he's going to kill soon if he hasn't already. You must know that by now.
Two Horse is a troublemaker. We all know that. Murder is a stretch for this punk, though. I tried to be dismissive to Rob or anyone who made a complaint. Truth was, I knew their concerns merited a closer look. He's just your garden variety bully, Rob. He picks fights that he knows he'll easily win. But if you recall from a similar conversation we had, there's the matter if I should go arrest him. Joe has through the years managed to get people not to press charges. People, for whatever reasons, including yourself, refuse to follow through.
I know I failed you before, Sheriff Hughes, but I won't bend the knee this time, implored Rob, with his pasty hands out apologetically. I could see the man was truly in fear. You have to promise me, swear, damn you won't change your mind this time. No matter the consequences, you'll see justice through. I can't have you cower out of fear of retribution. I think he is guilty of a number of crimes, some of them committed out of spite, like killing old Matilda's horse or Benson's bloodhound Pooch. But I could never prove anything because each one of them turned yellow when I had this swine pinned up. Sheriff Hughes. Two Horse walked up to my office porch. I raised my hat and nodded. My eyes locked on his emerald green. He smiled broadly and wickedly at me and Rob. With a voice that almost hissed like a rattlesnake, he said, "It's a nice day for a walk. Good day to you fine gentlemen." In that moment, Rob would lose his water and scurry off.
I don't know how he knew I was coming to see you, but it doesn't matter now, Chef Hughes. I changed my mind.
As the insidious man walked down the street from me, I'd sit up and scratch my chin, staring onward as the dust storms from the desert pushed down from the nearby mountains. I'd watch Joe Two-Horse stride with the sway of a desert reptile, then glance back with a knowing grin, which to me said, "You can't do anything to me." I have always tried to uphold the law. Justice above all else is my sole desire as a lawman. I truly believe in the rule of law and do my best to respect the rights of my fellow citizens. But this job gnaws into you sometimes. The weight of some of the things I've had to abide by following the letter of the law burdens the very conscience of my soul to the point I on occasion think of checking out permanently. Especially when pedophiles walk on technicalities, men get falsely charged for domestic abuse by lying whores, or starving families get evicted by overreaching business barons stealing their land. In those moments, I like the idea of taking that crooked son of a bitch, or bitch, I'm not particular these days, in a back room and kicking the shit out of them. I might get the book thrown at me for it, but at least I could hold my head up for a brief moment knowing I did the morally right thing, though not the legal one. Then I might be able to look on this haggard, worn face with some sense of pride that for once, the good guys won. For now, I have to live in the real world. I had to sit up and watch the vultures circle our modest town as Joe Two-Horse strutted free as a carrion bird hunting its next meal. But there was one hope in my future as I watched the evil man continue his stride. One thing I knew with certainty as a fly on shit. My path would cross Joe's, solving some twisted and inconceivable crime. In that moment, when I had the drop on him and the goods to prove it, Joe Two-Horse would pull iron and put me in a situation where I would drop him like a bad habit without hesitation or regret. At least, that was my hope. John Davis was my senior deputy. He was as homegrown as the Arizona cactus and as sure as the sage running the ridges of Winslow. To say he had lived here and worked here all his life was an understatement. My deputy was a whopping 6 feet tall, with the features and physique of a towering oak, swaying slowly in the wind. Though just a few years older than me, he had a simple approach to our Winslow way of life. He was beyond a doubt my best friend, and the best man on the force I had when the chips went south. John could have easily taken my job years ago, but shrewdly or not, he never wanted the headache and burden I carried now. He was just as happy being the number 2 guy in our department making the calls and not having to incur the responsibility or wrath of the town on a misstep. A rare thunderstorm was lighting up the Red Buttes one mid-morning as the sky was darkening and the pitter and patter of rain deluged our roof. I had to ask John his own history on Joe Two-Horse. I leaned back in my rickety oak chair and asked just after the first crash of lightning had struck. John, what's been your experiences with Joe Two-Horse? Is there anything you can tell me about him? My experience and knowledge of him. He's the nastiest excuse of a human, by the way. Dale were few and far between. He didn't run his mouth around me, but that's because he knew I'd break his jaw, and a whole lot worse.
John leaned his chair forward and rested his elbows on his knees. Then he whispered in a growl,
"What he did to Brooke McCarthy over at the college still makes my blood boil. If I'd have heard about him throwing her down the stairs pregnant, I'd have punched his ticket and saved the taxpayers a ton of money."
John was recalling the night Joe went to visit his ex-girlfriend. Tuos found out his on-again and off-again girlfriend had soiled her flower with an ASU jock who had the right kind of pollen. Marriage and a baby was soon to follow. Well, they were before the girl's untimely, accidental fall. I heard they charged him for the murder of the baby too. How the hell is he out now? I looked up at the stars that were just descending to mid-zenith over the Arizona sky.
That's a big mystery, boss. Some say the reservation put up a bribe, but I don't believe that rumor. It's pretty clear everybody on the reservation and Winslow hate that scumbag. Others that he might have bewitched the judge or the courtroom to go easy on him. I think when it was all said and done, he did maybe a year for involuntary manslaughter of Brooke.
John took a deep, exasperated breath.
I really hate our legal system sometimes. He's a legitimate murderer, and they slapped him on the wrist.
I know, buddy. I get frustrated with the legal system too on occasion. I must have tossed a chair or two when you were around in anger at some of these crooks getting a pass. As they say, the wheels of justice turn slow sometimes, if at all. I sat up and yawned, then ushered him to continue. Well, under a full moon, he came rolling back into town after a year. Hell, he even managed to get his old construction job back with a raise. Now I ask you, what company rehires a guy after he kills a pregnant woman accidentally or not? He waved me off and continued. He carried a real chip on his shoulder after his incarceration, though. Get this, he blamed the Billiganas, meaning us basically, and the unfairness of the law to the Navajo. John stood and paced angrily, thinking about the vile man. I'll let you in on a secret you might not know, Sheriff Hughes. Joe Two-Horse doesn't hate you or me per se. He hates us because we represent the law. And more than that, the law of the white man. It was our laws that put him behind bars. He can't even feel any empathy or comprehend his horrific act of killing a pregnant woman landed him in the pen. And just like a lot of these scoundrels do, he flipped up his victim card and blamed the murdered girl for putting him in the clink. Even today, for example, he was using his victimhood to try and steal a family-sized bag of M&Ms. Luckily, the shop owner gave him the bag, out of sympathy, mind you. When will this murdering fool take any blame or accept any responsibility? John sat and cooled from his tirade. I offered a Coke out of the fridge. He turned to me and nodded with a slight grin. Thank you, boss. I really got work to up. Sorry. No apologies, John. I took a sip of my Pop Rouge and looked over at him. One day, he'll show his true nature and drop his act. Then we'll nab him for good. As the rain stopped and the moon rose to a shimmering evening, I drove home, taking in the splendor of the rain-soaked desert and the moonlight, smiling while singing along to an old Eagles tune, possibly Hotel California. I'd catch the scents of sage and wildflowers on the night breeze. But in the weeks to follow, as we trekked the blood trail and the carnage of a ravenous beast across the shadowed deserts of Arizona, I'd remember my ominous conversation with my deputy, horrified by the savagery of this creature that killed without rhyme or reason or mercy. I'd look back on my conversation with John and shudder. Thank you for listening. Have a great night.